Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar of the Center for Middle East and Global Order. My name is Ali Fathollah-Nejad. I'm the founder and director of CMEG, and I'm very delighted to be joined today by our senior fellows of CMEG to discuss a very timely and important topic, which is the issue of US-Iran negotiations that have now entered a critical stage. Today, in the next about 90 minutes, we're going to discuss key issues, both of the internal politics of Iran that are weighing on the negotiations, but also the international stakes. And for that, we are joined, as I said, by our senior fellows. First, we're going to start talking about the very important issue of human rights, which has been neglected in the current negotiations. And Azadeh Pourzand, who is joining us from London, is going to talk about this. In a second step, we're going to go to Vienna, to Behrooz Bayat, who is a top authority of Iran's nuclear program and nuclear physicist and a former advisor to the International Atomic Energy Agency. And last but not least, we're going to go also to Vienna to Mahdi Ghodsi, who is an economist, a leading expert on Iran's economy. And we're going to ask him in what respect the economic crisis in Iran is impacting diplomacy. As I said at the outset, the negotiations between the United States and Iran have now entered a critical stage. We have heard over the past few days that the United States has given a written proposal to the Iranian side via Oman, who is the mediator in those negotiations. And it seems the main controversy and sticking point between the two sides pertains to the question of Iranian domestic uranium enrichment, something that the US government is now asking for and something that is colliding with the red line of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So this is why we see a lot of complications now. And actually, those negotiations have already seen 5 rounds, both in Oman, but also at the Omani embassy in Rome. And at the very start, with the return of Donald Trump to the White House, there was, first of all, rejection by the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran in terms of entering into negotiations with the United States. But then there was a U-turn that was also explained on religious grounds. And then we saw the start of negotiations between the two sides. And of course, there is also an international arena where there is a lot of pressure on the Islamic Republic of Iran, both regionally. We've seen the unraveling of the axis of resistance, which is the network of militias directed by Tehran, so that one could say that Iran finds itself in a position of regional weakness of perhaps historic proportions. We've seen the factor of Israel that has been demanding the Libyan model to be applied onto the Islamic Republic, which is to say the dismantlement of Iran's ballistic missile and nuclear program infrastructures, but which has most recently signaled that it would agree to a deal negotiated between Iran and the United States that is assuring zero enrichment and the dismantlement of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. And we have, of course, another important actor, which is the European parties to the signatories to the JCPOA, which is the Iran nuclear deal of 2015. Germany, France, the United Kingdom, that have threatened the snapback mechanism of the JCPOA to be activated, which would automatically reimpose UN sanctions in case by August there is no deal forged between Iran and the United States. So there is also more economic pressure on the horizon next to the reimposition of Trump's maximum pressure sanctions on Iran with the aim of driving Iranian oil revenues to zero. And last but not least, we have the crucial internal dimension in the Islamic Republic of Iran that is characterized by multiple crises of a structural nature. We have a human rights crisis. We have an economic crisis that is deeper and deeper by the day. And we're going to talk about both issues first with Azadeh and then with Mahdi. And so there are a lot of also internal pressures weighing on the decision making of the Islamic Republic of Iran when it comes to forging a deal or not with the United States. So without further ado, I'm going to start our discussion by giving the floor to Azadeh Pourzand in London. We're going to talk about the situation of human rights also in the context of diplomacy. Azadeh, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks everyone for taking the time to be here. My task is to essentially paint a picture of the situation of human rights in Iran and sort of adding my concern and worries that sidelining human rights in the current negotiations can have adverse effects on the already worsening and dire situation on the ground. The truth is that the situation of human rights in Iran has been in a crisis mode for a long time. Sometimes in the human rights community, we have the privilege of being able to communicate this more effectively to the international community and to the world when there are sort of nationwide street protests like what happened in 2022 with women life freedom, Iranians human rights demands were basically in the headlines for a short period of time. The atrocities of the Islamic Republic were on the headlines of around the world, and especially in the Western world, again for a short period of time. But unfortunately, we tend to lose the momentum when human rights in Iran is no longer sort of a matter of priority for the US or for Western countries in particular. We are unfortunately experiencing one of those moments, and this is quite worrisome for those of us who who are human rights researchers and advocates, have followed the patterns of the atrocities of the Islamic Republic for years and decades, and we see quite a worrying trend. Just to give you an example, just in 2025, so just a little before the United States began its negotiations focused on the nuclear situation with the Islamic Republic, until today, there have been over 500 executions happening in the country. According to a human rights agency, HRA, just in May alone, there have been, the Islamic Republic have executed 157 individuals, and this is all without due process, without fair trial, and often focused on the most marginalized groups in the country. And May has seen so far the highest number of executions in a month this year. And this has been the month that the United States and Iran have probably negotiated most intensely. Execution is not the only problem that the country has, but it is at a crisis point. It has been for the past many years, but especially has picked up again ever since Women Life Freedom's sort of crackdown campaign done by the Islamic Republic. I said this just to tell you that, as the negotiations happen, as not only the United States, but even, for example, the mainstream media of the West have decided to sideline the situation of human rights in Iran, the atrocities continue. The supreme leader of Iran, the leadership of the Islamic Republic, think of the human rights, sort of the dire human rights situation, the atrocities that they have committed over the decades and over the years, as something that no matter what, they would like to be able to continue doing. And because sometimes the West, picks on the human rights situation as a priority, and sometimes it drops it. The moments that it drops it, it's actually a very, very alarming sign for us, and a very good sign for the Islamic Republic. It means that I am deliberately closing my eyes to what is happening to the country, because it is no longer a matter of national security. For me as a Western country. And that's what we are experiencing right now. In the meantime, Iran has, for example, used the opportunity to invite journalists from important Western channels to come to Iran and to do coverage of, for example, how many women are appearing without the headscarf. Sort of the more positive, upbeat coverage and feature stories of the situation in Iran. And, again, those of us in the human rights community all the time have to add the nuance that every single one of those women who is not adhering to the compulsory veil at any moment can risk her freedom, her profession, can be beaten, and so on. So it's not as rosy suddenly as we want the situation to be. And another thing I want to emphasize is, it seems to me that we are experiencing one of those eras where the United States, but also the international community, seems to be willing to separate socioeconomic rights from civil political rights, and sort of for the matter of convenience, to focus on question of prosperity, question of also with the worsening of sanctions, that people's economic situation comes first, and then we will deal, if we will, with the civil and political rights. But I just want to remind all of us that these rights, socioeconomic and civil and political rights, are considered interconnected, and they're universal. And in a country where, for example, right now we are experiencing the strike of truckers nationwide in Iran. And in May, at least 20 arrests have been related to those, and there are predictions that there will be more. So when you are in a country or in a setup where, for your socioeconomic rights, when you have grievances, you express your grievances, and then you turn into an activist, that then essentially the regime will deal with you as a dissident, and will deprive you of all of your universal civil and political rights. You cannot possibly separate these two from each other. And another thing is, you're talking about a heavily corrupt country, institutionalized corruption. And if tomorrow the nuclear situation is totally resolved in whatever way, and all the sanctions are lifted, it by no means means that the money will be poured into onto the tables of the Iranian people, and even their socioeconomic rights will be alleviated in a guaranteed manner or in a notable manner. So I'll stop here, because I know that we don't have much time, and I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Azadeh for this most fascinating, but yet very sad kind of explanations. And it's really shocking, the number that you mentioned in terms of 500 since the start of the negotiations. 1.5 months ago or so, negotiations have started. And it's absolutely, amazing how Western coverage does not deal with those issues anymore, and how the attention has shifted onto the negotiations, the nuclear issue, of course, and just to note that human rights was precisely one of the major blind spots already in the 2015 nuclear deal, back then forged between the Obama administration and the Islamic Republic of Iran, together, of course, with other world powers. So can you perhaps explain why the inclusion of human rights is important to diplomacy? And also, before responding to that, may I just add that also in the wake of the 2016 JCPOA, because you mentioned the lack of the trickling down effect of economic dividends from a potential deal onto the civilian population in Iran. something exactly that happened. According to a Reuters report back then, 80% of the businesses with the international world, with the international arena, went to semi-state and state entities, which is the definition of the regime. So, not much has trickled down onto the civilian population back then in Iran, which led to an increase of the income gap, which also led to social frustration. So even if a deal comes about, as you rightly noted, with sanctions relief, doesn't mean that we're going to see an improvement. But again, so how would you explain to those who tend to think that taking into account human rights issues is not something that diplomacy should care about?
Yes, thank you for your follow-up question. Yeah, I mean, that's a question that we are sometimes asked. And, for those people who are of the belief that diplomacy should have nothing to do with the human rights situation, or that human rights should not be in the list of priorities, it should be something that maybe should be dealt with at a later stage. It's always difficult to sound convincing, to be honest. First of all, it's a question of moral obligation that I find difficult to convince those who don't believe in it in any way other than just reminding ourselves of that this is an obligation of the international community to when, for example, when we talk about these negotiations as a means towards the welfare of the Iranian people, the Iranian people's welfare has never been this nuclear issue. Has been like everybody else in this world, a typical Iranian family would need a variety of rights guaranteed in order to be able to prosper. And so, and as you have probably also seen in some of the statements made by the officials in the US, and also, in the international community, and we experienced some of this also during JCPOA, the welfare of the Iranian people comes in question every time that they mention they want to sort of, make a sort of justification about the deals. It's not always only security, it's also the welfare of the Iranian people. And so, the only way to guarantee the welfare of the Iranian people is to look at the question of human rights in a well-rounded manner, and to include it as tactfully as possible. That's the job of a diplomat. That's not my job, but as tactfully as possible in the process of the negotiations. Because, if you leave this for a later stage, where at that later stage you may not have the bargaining power anymore. And this is an opportune moment to essentially obligate a country, a regime that we know very well evidently does not believe in human rights, and has there's a load of evidence of its serious atrocities against its people, to at least some certain minimal standards of upholding to international human rights standards towards its people. Not only this, you're talking about a regime that not long ago and currently even is engaged in serious, like I said, serious human rights atrocities. There are even questions that crimes against humanities happened, as we saw in the report of the UN fact-finding mission, that they said that this should be further explored, as there is potentially a question of crimes against humanities against the protesters. You're talking to and about this kind of a regime. And we always say in human rights, holding a government accountable for its atrocities is not only a question of seeking justice for what happened in the past, it's a question of preventative measure for the future. If tomorrow there will be protests again happening, nationwide in Iran, there is no stopping this regime to open fire again, and even at a more widespread manner than it did the last time on its population, because why should it fear anything? if it sees that the most powerful country in the world has decided to sideline the human rights issue. So it's very risky. It's very, very risky to sideline human rights. And many people say that because the regime is as basically would never adhere to human rights, putting human rights in the negotiations as a priority would basically mean that the regime would have to change. That's something that the Iranian regime has to decide. This is not, you don't decide this for them. You put this, in the list of conditions, and this is for them to decide if they want to survive or if they don't want to survive. I feel that the international community always wants to protect the Islamic Republic from not changing by not putting this, including this. But this is actually, we have to allow them to decide what they want to do. And I think that's one way to do it, to include it as one of the conditions.
Thank you, dear Azadeh, for your most incisive insights as someone who is also as a scholar has been, involved in global civil society on those issues. And may I just add, in my own words, that human rights is somehow stability relevant. If the aim of diplomacy is to create stability, then including human rights would also be a way to create sustainable stability. Otherwise, we're not going to see a true stabilization that is going beyond the short term, perhaps. So now we're going to go over to Dr. Behrooz Bayat from Vienna, who is a top authority on Iran's nuclear issue, the go-to guy of Persian media, outside of Iran at least, and a nuclear physicist, a former advisor to the International Atomic Energy Agency. And may I ask Behrooz to give us his understanding of where the diplomatic process is now standing. Behrooz.
Thank you, Ali, for my introduction, and a good day to the audience, to ladies and gentlemen present in the room, in the Zoom room. Actually, when we talk about the nuclear program of the Islamic Republic, it is meant the enrichment program. That is what is disputed, the enrichment program. After the withdrawal from the JCPOA by first Trump administration, the Islamic Republic rediscovered its nuclear program, enrichment program, as a mean for threatening, for pressuring, or things like this. With the result that it came close and closer to the weapon-grade uranium, to 60% enrichment grade of uranium. The result is that the Western countries come in an emergency situation, let's say. Come in, it means they have to prevent Iran to get nuclear weapon first. And why they are in an emergency situation? Because the instrument the Western countries had in order to pressure Iran via JCPOA, which is called snapback mechanism. Snapback mechanism will end in October this year. So they are in a, let's say, in an emergency situation they have to handle. On the other hand, the new administration of Trump also would like to get a solution as soon as possible. So then, as Ali told at the start, there are two in the negotiations. There are two red lines colliding to each other. And so at the beginning, the red line of the US was somehow shaky, a bit oscillating between enrichment yes or enrichment no, with the result that at the end, right now, they say zero enrichment. And the other position from the Iranian side is vice versa. It means the Iranian side would like to maintain somehow the enrichment, a very low level, but anyway, to the possibility of enrichment. So now it is the problem of the negotiation, because to my understanding, the reason why the Islamic Republic insists on having somehow the possibility of enrichment is that it is a matter of honor for the regime, because they did so much propaganda in the last years that they cannot forego it. They cannot renounce the entire enrichment. So the question is how the diplomats find a way to get closer, taking into account, for example, that let's say the honor of the Islamic Republic should be considered, for example, you know. So there are some right now some scenarios. One scenario is to building a consortium for enrichment between Iran, some Arab countries in the southern coast of Persian Gulf, and United States, maybe. You know, it would. I mean, that is such a project doesn't have a real material basis. You know, it cannot be done. But as a formal action, you know, in order that that for the Islamic Republic face saving is produced, could be an issue. You know, that is one point. Other point could be, for example, that the West and the United States accept principally the possibility of enrichment, but with a long moratorium. You know, say that it would be a second solution. A third solution could be a compensation, because Islamic Republic has invested billions of dollars into this project, and so maybe the compensation, financial compensation, could also play some role. You know, the question of in this situation we have the as I told you, that the Western countries, the United States, are in an emergency situation due to the snapback. And so in this situation, they asked the IAEA to produce a new report, a new comprehensive report about the situation of the nuclear program of the Islamic Republic. The result is somehow harsher than before vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic. So it means probably the Western country could use this report, maybe paired with a resolution of Board of Government of IAEA. Maybe they create a justification to activate the snapback mechanism. And if the snapback mechanism is activated, then the entire resolutions of the Security Council will be reactivated again, and all of these are under the Article 7 of Charter of the United Nations. It means let's say, the disturbance or whatever the right expression of the peace in the world. It means then the Western country can get, or the USA can get the justification for military actions, for example. That is one issue. But I think um, uh, um, another issue is that nowadays, in the last weeks, the people speak about attacking the nuclear sites of Iran. Actually, it is not allowed. Actually, according to um, uh, the international laws, it is not allowed. But we know Israel doesn't care for things like this. But if it happens, it means we would have a catastrophe in the entire region. For example, around Natanz and around Fordo, there's two positions where enrichment is going on. It would create really a big pollution. I mean, a big radioactivity pollution for the, for example, for cities like Natanz, Kashan, maybe Isfahan, and on the other hand, with Tehran and Qom and so on and so on. It is not an easy issue. There are some people, they talk about it as if, okay, you attack it and it is over. No, it will not go over. So it will have serious consequences for the entire region. So that is the effect of military, if a military strike, which I hope will not happen, take place. I think I am with my time probably over.
Thank you, Behrooz Jan.
I finish
Thank
at
you.
this
May I
point,
just
and thank
ask
you
you if,
for your attention.
thank you. If I may just ask you for, and please, try to respond briefly if you can. So the sticking point in the negotiations seems to be, as you said, Iran's right or non-right to domestic enrichment. Do you think the Islamic Republic can be a bit flexible in that? Because you talked about the nuclear program being, something reputational and or something, as an honor. I mean, in the regime parlance at least. But is it? I mean, domestic enrichment would also allow the Islamic Republic to restart the so-called nuclear escalation strategy if they see this is necessary. So zero enrichment, if zero enrichment is defined by the dismantling of the domestic uranium enrichment capability, this would not allow for a restart of nuclear escalation, nor would a consortium model where there is no enrichment inside of Iran, but where other arrangements are made that uranium enrichment is imported into Iran by other countries, from other countries. So do you think the Islamic Republic is going to insist on domestic uranium enrichment in order to be able to restart nuclear escalation strategy?
Yeah. I don't think that the Islamic Republic is in a position to withstand, to do resistance to the demand of the US. They cannot do it. They are in the weakest point in their history. Whatever you think, the entire situation of the country is actually is a catastrophic. The regime cannot allow themselves to resist. What they will try, and so because of that, they will show some flexibility. What they did up to now, they did some flexibility. The question is whether the diplomats get a solution which is somehow face saving for the Islamic Republic. Imagine JCPOA was also a face saving accord. Because what remained at that time from the nuclear program of Iran was nothing, just formally. Iran could enrich uranium of up to the level 3.667 and only 300 kilograms in the same time, the stockpiles was maximum 300. And then it means essentially the nuclear program didn't have any meaning more, just face saving. The question is how they find this time a face saving mechanism. One of these face saving mechanisms could be a consortium which will never be really created. It could start somehow negotiating about it. Of course, Iran should stop its, the West will, the US will demand that Iran stops its nuclear enrichment, maybe by also dismantling it with the option to build a consortium. But as I told you, a consortium has actually no real base right now in Iran, in the region. You imagine, Iran doesn't have a nuclear industry. It's just they can produce that much uranium for making bombs, but for nothing else. It's no use. The capacity is so low. For example, to give you an example, I estimated the capacity of Iranian enrichment is around 40,000 su. But if you have a nuclear industry, you are talking about 10 million su, 15 million, 20, 30 million sus, with 40,000 is actually nothing. You can make a bomb, but not an industry. That is why I'm telling that there is no basis for a consortium, but it could create a formal face-saving way for the regime. Yeah? And probably that I hope that the diplomats have enough imagination, enough fantasy to find a way to, let's say, to give somehow a face-saving assurance to Islamic Republic to get an agreement and to avoid a war.
Thank you, Behrooz John. For now, I forgot to say that after our round of speakers, we're going to, of course, take questions from the audience on Zoom. So please, you can start writing down your questions. So please pose your questions in writing into the Zoom chat, and we're more than happy to respond to them. Also, as a clarification to our first topic of discussion tonight, when it came to the issue of executions, the number of 500 did not happen since the start of US-Iran negotiations, but within this year, which is still quite a huge number. So thank you, Azadeh, for that clarification that you put to me. Last but not least, now we're going to go over to one of the most crucial topics, something that is also quite, not covered properly in the Western media, which is escaping a lot of international attention, which is the ever deteriorating economic crisis in Iran. And for that, we're going over to Mahdi Ghodsi, who is also in Vienna. Mahdi, you're going to certainly lay down the various components of Iran's economic crisis. And what also has happened is that now we are seeing, as Azadeh already mentioned, a nationwide strike by truck drivers in Iran, which has already entered its second week. in over 130 cities and towns in the country. This truckers' strike is probably the most important mass protest that we've seen since the last one, the Women Life Freedom Uprising in the fall of 2022. And interestingly, the truckers' drive strikes have begun in Bandar Abbas, which is in the south of Iran on the Persian Gulf, where before on April 26, we had a major explosion of Rajai port, which is the international gateway, international trade hub, where 85 to 90% of Iranian containers go through. So this is also something that is, of course, of huge ramifications. Sorry, I have a lot of questions for you. So maybe you're going to start and I'm going to just put my questions afterward. Thank you, Mahdi. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ali, for the nice introduction. Thanks to all the panelists for their interesting analysis on the topics that they were covering. So I'm starting from the point that the areas of concerns between the United States and Iran is not only nuclear issue, is not only human rights, but also other issues like regional issues and ballistic missile program and many other deeper issues. But the point of discussion the point of negotiation between the two countries is currently nuclear issues. So they are trying to reach a deal, at least to make some compromises with regards to enrichment, etc. But in order to explain the economic issues behind, I should say that while the areas of concerns is those things that I mentioned, but the areas of concern for Islamic Republic is mostly the economic issues, because since 2011, since the international community through the United Nations intensified sanctions against the Islamic Republic, specifically on nuclear issues, we should say that economic conditions in Iran has been on a downward trend line. So if we consider different factors, for instance, inflation in the past 6 years has been hovering above 40%, which is twice the size of inflation in the previous years. In all previous years, the average inflation was about 20% on average. But of course, there were some hikes, spikes in a few points in time during the time of Islamic Republic. It means that prices have, increased inflation have contributed a lot to risks and uncertainties in Iran. It has downgraded the business environment. So the amount of uncertainties, not only about inflation, but also about other geopolitical factors, have caused tremendous risks on investment. It means that since 2011, since 2012, or even since a decade ago, the growth rate in gross investment or capital formation has been around negative. It means that investment environment was never good in Iran in the past decade because of sanctions, because of escalating geopolitical tensions. For instance, China and many other Eastern countries, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, they trade with Iran. Specifically, they are bypassing sanctions through secondary routes, or they are buying Iranian oil. They are mainly doing trade with Iran, and they do not make any investment. So the amount of foreign direct investment in Iran from many other countries is so low that it cannot produce enough investment. And capital is, as we know, the major factor, the major factor of production, which is missing in Iran. So because of that, because of bad business environment, GDP has not been raising in the past, let's say 10 years. Since 2011, the average growth in GDP, gross domestic product, was hovering around zero, less than 0.5% on average, annual average. So if we compare the 13, 14 years before 2011, we observe that the growth rate in those previous years was above 5%. So comparing 5% average annual growth rate before 2011 and the average annual growth rate of 0.5% after 2011 would tell us that if sanctions were not there, the gross, the GDP in Iran would have been doubled currently. It means that with the growing population, the GDP per capita of Iran is now smaller than what it was in 2011. And if sanctions were not there, it could have been doubled or 70, 80% higher than what it is today. So that is the substantial economic costs of the nuclear program. So the Iranian regime sees that. The Iranian regime now comes to its senses. Khamenei comes to its senses. So now, in the beginning of this Persian calendar year, Khamenei calls the year of investment in order to show his understanding of investment and capital flows. Because of this, we observed in the past year since Raisi died in the helicopter crash, we understood that Khamenei wants a reformist president in order to improve the business environment in Iran and in order to make a rapprochement with the United States. So all of these things signal that Islamic Republic or Khamenei himself would like to make a new peace deal with the United States, although they are signaling that they're not giving up on enrichment, something that I mentioned that does not have any economic benefits. It doesn't have economic benefits even in the sense that, as also Behrooz mentioned, that Iran doesn't need enriched uranium in its facilities. It has one nuclear power plant in Bushehr, and it does not have enough demand for such an enriched uranium. So it's everything that they are arguing is mainly symbolic, and it's going through the resilient economy, a resilient economy that was advocated by Khamenei himself and by his loyalists, non-economists, experts who somehow advocated for resilient economy. And now we observe that this resilient economy is not even resilient anymore. So now, because of bad economic conditions, the employment has not been grown. Only less than 30% of the total population is officially employed. Comparing it with Turkey, it's about 42% of the population. Comparing it with an advanced economy like Austria, it's about more than 50% of population that is employed officially. So when you compare these things, you would observe that many people in Iran cannot make the end of the month because of high inflation, because their salaries are not adjusted. Exchange rate has been, since 2011, exchange rate has depreciated by 98%, which means that the imports of many goods that Iran cannot produce self-sufficiently, the prices of those imported goods has been on the rise. At the time of Raisi 2 years ago, some oil that were used in foodstuff or other kinds of commodities in food categories has observed an inflation of more than 100-200%. Because of bad, poor economic conditions, people do not have a good life anymore. So according to the authorities at the time of Rouhani, 33% of population is on the poverty rate. And because of high inflation, because of bad, poor economic conditions, I believe that this 33% should be even higher now. 60% of population cannot get and absorb enough calories, and the government cannot sustain its budget anymore. That's why they are in talk with the IAEA, International Monetary Fund, in few weeks to see how they can remove the subsidies on gasoline and benzene. Within few weeks, they would like to reduce the quotas on gasoline, and that's why truckers are going on a strike. Have just before reducing the quotas, before increasing the oil price, gasoline price, they started the strike. So this strike is very crucial and important, because if it cannot get resolved, it can easily spill over to other sectors of economy, to other professions. We observe in the past years that there have been frequent such strikes across teachers, workers who are working in refineries. So these are telling us that economic conditions are the direst since the Islamic Republic is in power. And I think that's the major issue behind pushing the Islamic Republic to the negotiating table. So I stop here, and if you have any question, I'm here.
Thank you, dear Mahdi. And also, may I add that in terms, since you mentioned, the proportion of the Iranian population, the low one, that is employed, according, if I'm not mistaken, according to the Statistical Center of Iran, all those who work merely 1 hour per week are excluded from the unemployment rate, correct? So the real figures are much higher. I assume so. It's the same with the inflation rate, which is, as you have also said in other interviews, over the last half a decade, hovering around at least 40%. So the real inflation rate may also be, considerably higher than that. Also, the inflation rate for those low-income households is also much, much higher. So probably even double that rate, which is also has a lot of. So we have a situation where we both have a macroeconomic crisis with the IMF that has corrected its projection for GDP growth from 3.0% within a few months to more recently 0.3%. And we have a socioeconomic crisis, which you aptly described, which sees perhaps the majority of the Iranian population in poverty now. What do you think in terms of, and also you talked about potentially another major issue that is on the horizon, which is the cutting of the subsidies. The last time the Islamic Republic did that was in November 2019, or in a considerable fashion, which sparked, with a tripling of fuel prices overnight, which sparked a nationwide uprising, the so-called Alban protests of November 2019, with 200,000 people, according to the Ministry of the Interior, partaking in it, which was only, cracked down quite brutally, as Azad and others know, of course, with at least 1,500 people being shot, and being killed. So this is also on the horizon, as you say, and we have the ramifications from the current strikes that are near, that are probably not going to end anytime soon, it seems. And also the ramifications, I'm wondering, of the port explosion that I said. So first, what do you think the ramifications from the port explosion going to be in the medium term in Iran? Also, the disruption of domestic logistics with the trucker strike. So what will the economic fallout from that be? And added to that, do you see the possibility, if there is no deal reached, including sanctions relief, that we're going to see some kind of economic collapse in Iran?
Good points and good questions. It needs actually more time for discussion, but I can say that the explosion in the Bandar Abbas port was one of the major issues behind supply chain disruptions, because this port is not the primary port for the imports of primary commodities like foodstuffs, but it's a very critical port, the largest port in terms of delivery of containers and tankers in terms of other commodities that are used in the supply chain and production chain. In addition, the strikes of truckers is very crucial also for the supply chain disruptions, especially because most of what truckers are delivering are foodstuffs, and if they cannot deliver them, the foodstuffs get corrupted easily within a few days. So that might potentially exert ample pressure on price of foodstuffs and commodities. Maybe in a few weeks, if it continues, people will face empty shops or shop shelves everywhere in Iran, because main cities have not even main cities have railway transportation to ports to deliver such kinds of food products, but also smaller cities have huge difficulties in delivering such foodstuffs or any other kind of industrial goods through these truckers. So if it continues and gets sustained, it will spill over to other sectors. So the economic effects could be better observed in a few weeks. But according to some estimates that I've read through the internet, or according to some Iranian sources, every day there's a waste of about billions of toman, which is a huge amount on a daily basis. And as every individual who is living
Thank you, Mahdi John. So there is now a few questions that we have. I'm not sure if you saw the question, Mahdi, and already responded to that in your last statement, the question about the weight of the sanctions when it comes to explaining Iran's domestic economic crisis. So perhaps I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes and you can respond to that. Because you also, of course, mentioned the kleptocratic nature of the Islamic Republic. So there's one question pertaining to that, but you started, outlining your first statement by connecting diplomacy or the negotiations with the economic crisis, and that's why, as I understood it, you talked about the weight of sanctions. For Behrooz, there is one question which I'm going to pose to him on if negotiations are truly intended toward a diplomatic resolution, or are they only an excuse for preparing the ground for a military strike on Iran? So this is also one of the questions. And I'm not sure if Azadeh can respond to the next one, which is the question of the environmental protection and environmental activism in Iran. Why is it banned? So what makes it so dangerous, perhaps? Unfortunately, we have also an environmental expert in our core Iran team, Shirin Hakim, who is precisely an expert on this issue. So hopefully we're going to have a session with her on those environmental issues that are huge, actually. So I'm going to just allow any one of you who wants to step in to respond to any of those questions. There is also a question why, and something that Azadeh actually already answered at the very beginning, which is why would the West legitimize the Islamic Republic by negotiating with it? And why not focus on delegitimizing and bringing it down? So perhaps this also is a question that some people may ask, and which also pertains to also the role of Iranians inside perhaps the country, rather than some outside intervention that I think no serious Iranian is advocating for. So perhaps do you want to start, Azadeh?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ali, and thank you for the panelists. I learned a lot listening to all of you. Well, yes, I'm just gonna continue from where you left off, Ali, on about why should the West negotiate at all with Iran or not. I am not an expert of nuclear issues. I specifically speak about the human rights situation, and as you said, at least in my case, I wouldn't advocate for a regime change from the outside. I do think that the Iranian people have shown determination, courage, and a vision for their own future by stating their grounds against all risks, whether it's in nationwide protests, strikes, or many other ways of expressing grievances. I do think that the path of justice, allowing for the culture of impunity to end in Iran, and allowing for accountability through international justice mechanisms, is the way that the international community could help and support the Iranian people reach their own aim, whatever that aim is, peacefully. In terms of the environmental issue, I think maybe in the absence of our expert between Mahdi and I, we can try to answer it. I see that the environmental issue as something that is very much intertwined with the corruption that has deepened in the Islamic Republic, and the question of resources. And also, it's something that in my observation, the Iranian youth are very keen sort of to tackle and engage with. Unfortunately, the Islamic Republic has politicized this issue as well. It used to be that many years ago, environmental activists had a little bit of wiggle room more than others in order to advocate for environmental issues. But with the arrest of many environmentalists, with the atrocities against them, mistreating them in prisons, lack of fair trial, torture, and so on, that has changed. And so it will be difficult probably to go back to how it was, which was not without risk, but there was some wiggle room. And at the same time, some of the environmental issues, especially water, has to do with some of the more marginalized and ethnic minority areas of the country, which are considered quite sensitive for the Islamic Republic, especially when there is mobilization around around the water issue. And at the moment, in the very weak moment, I believe that the Islamic Republic wouldn't risk allowing for those grievances to come forth or that kind of activism to flourish.
Thank you so much, Azadeh. Perhaps, Mahdi, if you don't want to add something on the environmental issues, I'm going to first go to Behrooz and then come back to you for the rest of the questions.
Sure.
So, yeah. So, Behrooz, you want to take the floor?
Yes. So thank you for the question. If I understood it properly, the question was whether the negotiations, let's say, are time gaining for preparation for a war. Did I understand? Did I
Yes, it was along these
understand it
lines.
properly? Yeah. Okay. No, I don't think the US and the West generally they are interested to begin with the war in the region. You know, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan was so disastrous for the United States that I think they have learned their lesson. That is why. So that is one issue. The other issue is that uh, I think uh, Trump is not the warrior type, you know, of person. So these both together, I don't think they are interested in a war. They will not begin. They do, I would say, whatever they can to avoid a war. You know, it depends now on the side, on the Islamic Republic side, what they do, because I think if um, there is a possibility that Islamic Republic acquires nuclear bomb, then it would be a casus belli. It would be a ground or a reason for a war, you know. But I think the Islamic Republic, I think they have realized that there is not they don't have that much possibility. You know, uh, they they know that enrichment has no economic benefit for the country. They know that exactly, and now I hope they have realized that they cannot use it also as a deterrence because the Islamic Republic wanted to have a nuclear bomb as a um, mean as an instrument for deterrence. You know? And later on, when that path was blocked, they thought it is a mean of deterrence if they get how to say this is on the verge of building making nuclear bomb. You know, but they see that it is not anymore possible. So that is why I think that the Islamic Republic only needs a face-saving compromise. You know, let us see what is going on. And the other question, whether the negotiations would legitimize the regime. I think we should take into account what is the result if there is no negotiation. The result would be a disastrous war, you know, and it should be with all means a war should be avoided. So, and in this time, the issue of legitimizing the regime or not legitimizing lose its importance, you know, is not that crucial. The main issue is to prevent war. Thank you.
Just as an addition to that, to play devil's advocate, do you think that when speaking of war, we're talking about a comprehensive and all-out war, or are we talking about targeted military strikes?
So I think if there is a war, you know, Netanyahu would like to have a war. That we know that from the earlier and now. So, and if the United States also agree to go to a war, but they can go only together, you know, then they should their attacks on facilities of Iran, nuclear facilities, unfortunately, and also military facilities, and maybe also the energy facilities. You know, they try to paralyze the regime. You know, if they attack Iran, they have to, as is the normal way, they will bring Iran in a situation that is not capable of harming the U.S. facilities there, and also the U.S. allied governments, you know, or countries. You know, that is what I think. If there is a war, it will be, unfortunately, a full-fledged war. You know, just in a small war, I don't think that is feasible, because the Islamic Republic has the means, for example, to disturb the whole activities in the Arab countries on the Persian Gulf. Imagine that Arab countries on the Persian Gulf, they are not anymore interested in a war. They were, in the time of JCPOA, they tried to block the development in the direction of making the accord to JCPOA. They wanted at that time that we should kill the snake, the head of the snake, for example. You know, at that time, you know, now they are not anymore interested, and I think these are countries which have influence on Trump, you know, and that is why Trump has also an incentive not to go to a war, you know. That is why they don't go. But if they go to the war, for the Islamic Republic, the only way to make a revenge is to attack the allied countries of the West, of the US. You know, that is why if they go to a war, they will paralyze the entire country.
Thank you, Behrooz, for those explanations. Now over to Mahdi. First of all, there was a question of the weight of economic sanctions on Iran's economic crisis. And perhaps secondly, let's say sanctions as a result of a deal, at least the nuclear-related sanctions, are going to be lifted or are lifted. What is the ramifications of such a move on different, let's say, indicators of Iran's economy? So what indicators are going to improve, and what are the indicators that are not going to improve necessarily from the removal of nuclear-related sanctions?
Sure. So we have several good questions actually asked in the chat, and one of them is from Faramars, and I think it's a very relevant question. Actually, the Islamic Republic is a despotic state, and it's a kleptocratic state. According to political science theories, economic theories, economic development and political development are needed at the same time simultaneously, so they are very endogenous. According to the histories of many nations in Europe, in other countries, in other parts of the world, economic development would bring, of course, political development, and economic recession in the long run would bring political decay, as also Francis Fukuyama mentioned in his book. So the problem of Iran is that it is ruled by an extractive institution that extracts political rents as well as economic rents. So it's a political and economic institution that focuses specifically on its ideology and on its own survival. So it doesn't prioritize welfare of the society in the form of a democratic state that is accountable through its political base and through its democratic elections. On the contrary, Iran is legitimized simply through its extractive institutions that are governed around the supreme leader and his other councils like Expediency Council, like Guardian Councils. So it does not pursue economic growth and economic development. Anytime they are planning, they are making 5 years plans, annual plans, they cannot even reach and realize the targets that they are aiming at in those plans. So in addition to sanctions, of course, economic mismanagement is a crucial factor here that does not allow Iran to enjoy a large GDP growth. But think about the story that I told you before, the 2011 intensified sanctions. And it was the time that Iran was able to sell oil. Khatami, during his reformist presidency, he managed to increase foreign direct investment. It boosted investment. So average annual growth of gross investment or capital formation at the time of Khatami was the highest in the history of Islamic Republic, and that helped creating jobs. The 30% employment of the whole population that I mentioned was achieved and improved at the time of Khatami. So if sanctions are removed, if good relations are made with other countries, there's a potential for increased investment, for increased economic growth. So that's why I'm not sure how much in percentage term there should be the weight of sanctions, but as Farah Myers also cited a paper by Hashem Persaran, there are different estimates and it could get different weights according to different data samples, different periods, and different methods of estimations. And another question that you asked, Ali, was what would be the consequence of sanctions removal? So if all areas of concern between Islamic Republic and the United States are covered and negotiated and the full rapprochement is realized, then we would expect that Iran becomes a second United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia with a huge potential for growth and sustainable development. But it's not going to be the case because now the focus is only on the nuclear issue. So if nuclear issues are resolved and if there's a new deal coming up, then the sanctions related to nuclear issues will be removed. And that would allow Iran to export oil as much as it was exporting before the sanctions intensified before 2011, meaning 2.4 million barrels per day at least. That would allow the Iranian government to implement expansionary fiscal policies, increase public investment, increase subsidies. That would allow the government to produce some growth in Iran in another form. It would allow, because the government would then retrieve the payment of oil export, it would be able to reduce inflation substantially. So inflation would be the most important indicator to be improved or to be lowered after the sanctions are removed, sanctions that are related to nuclear. Then we could observe a substantial growth in exports of oil, and that would boost the GDP growth, maybe above 4%, 5%. And after that, in the medium run, we could expect an increase in employment, reduction in poverty. But because it is, again, only on the nuclear issues and does not cover other issues like regional issues, the tensions between Israel and the Islamic Republic, there is always a high risk of escalating tensions between Israel and Iran. So that's a key factor here for foreign direct investment. Even China would not like to invest in such a country that is always under threat of political tensions. And the reason is clear. They could easily attack covertly, overtly, a port that is being under investment by Chinese, and their whole investment would be gone. So if the scenario is like that, it is only nuclear issues, then we wouldn't expect much of foreign direct investment coming to Iran, but trade would be boosted, oil exports would be boosted, and then GDP growth on the back of oil exports would be achieved. And if negotiations are not reaching any deal, the opposite would happen. As we observed, the exchange rate would fall again. the economic conditions would be worsened, strikes would be increased. So not reaching a deal would lead to war, and that's something that I also do not like it.
So here again, I'm also going to play devil's advocate before I gonna pose the last question to Azadeh. There's also the other argument that if money as a result of sanctions relief gonna flow into the Islamic Republic because of the nature of the state that you described, and because of the priorities that the state has in securing regime rather than national interests, this would perhaps end up cementing authoritarianism. Also, in the current budget, in this context, there is also the provision that a considerable share of the oil income goes to the armed forces. So how would you respond? Although, again, this is a very complicated issue, and I'm sure that you could talk about it in an hour, but in 1 hour, for 1 hour. But how would you? So, do you think, on the other hand, so would it rather cement authoritarianism, or would it actually also have an effect contrary to that? Mahdi.
Is it a question to me? Okay.
Yes. Sorry, so should I repeat, or did you?
No.
Okay.
Even despite sanctions, the authoritarianism of the state was intensifying. As we have noted in several articles before, the budget of security forces, military forces, the hardline cores of the state were still there, and they were being increased by more than 100%. Although some other parts of the budget, like the salaries of employees of the government, has increased on an annual basis of 20-30%, much lower than the inflation. So what I think removal of sanctions would bring to the regime would be technology. They could bring surveillance technology in a much higher capacity from China and Russia than before. So that's the only caveat here. And they were supporting their proxies in the region, even despite sanctions, despite being disconnected from the SWIFT transactions. And I think by removing the sanctions, and even by compliance of the laws and legislations with the Financial Action Task Force to delist Iran from the blacklist, would again not change the situation. If the Islamic Republic would like to support Hamas or other terrorist organizations in the region, they would do it with or without sanctions. As many other countries in the region, they still support these organizations. So I don't think that would be a worse condition, much worse condition, but I think it would be a relief, economic relief for the society that is completely paralyzed by the economic mismanagement of the regime and also sanctions.
Thank you, Mahdi. Last but not least, we're gonna.
May I make a remark on this issue?
Yes, but very, yeah.
Yeah. I think we should not expect that, let's say, if there is an agreement, if the result of the negotiation is positive, we should not expect that in Iran, in the Islamic Republic, the things goes well, because of the inefficiency, corruption, and all these characteristics of Islamic Republic. There is no way for a real development. The only immediate issue is that the acute, very disastrous situation for the people, for the citizens, will be a bit better. But I don't think that it has a prospect. You can compare the situation with the time after JCPOA. After JCPOA, the doors were open and the money came in, oil could be sold, and so on. and we had also, to some extent, higher GDP and higher employment. But at the end, 1996, the first big movement all over the country was in the time after the removal of sanctions. It means the Islamic Republic is not capable of preparing a really economic development which results in a better situation for the people. We should not forget this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The protests that you mentioned were, of course, the day protests at the turn of the year 2017-18.
Yeah, okay, 1996. That's why in Iranian. Okay, it was
yeah.
90,
So, and the implementation of the JCPOA was in yes.
Yes, 17 is right. Yeah, 2017.
Azadeh, the question at the end is directed to you. And the question comes from Yuna, who has joined CMEG, by the way, quite recently, who is now based in Washington, D.C. He asks what the West can do in order to support or to positively affect the human rights situation. Is it more press coverage? Is it support of grass movements in Iran or UN resolutions or others?
Thank you, Ali, and thank you, Yuna. Well, it's essentially a more systematic approach to the question of human rights in Iran, and one that doesn't fluctuate around, other political priorities, depending on who is in charge in various Western countries. Because that fluctuation of prioritization of human rights and then deprioritizing it gives the signal to a government or the regime like the Islamic Republic that it essentially has room to continue its atrocities, and that the consequences for continuing its human rights violations are not as grave as they should be, which means that they will continue. So in the human rights community, we tend to always favor sort of a more comprehensive and, as I said, systematic approach to human rights, and one that is really in line with multilateralism. So I think that's most effective when the international community, and it's not only the West, sort of ensures consistency over the question of human rights in a country like Iran. Some of the examples you just mentioned are some tools that, when used appropriately, can prove relatively effective. But at the end of the day, I go back to my point earlier. You're talking about a government that has systematically violated the rights of its people, and has had widespread records of atrocities committed against its people, and has seen no real consequences as a result of that. If this continues, the atrocities will continue and they will become even wider, depending on how the country will be economically sort of more empowered or not. When I say the country, I mean the regime will be more economically empowered, less isolated. It may, for example, become an example of a country that to a degree can, maybe figure out a way to be business friendly, but then continue its atrocities against the Iranian people. So I think the question of human rights is a very delicate question. And in the case of Iran, it has very much to do with holding those responsible for the atrocities, whether our institutions or individuals, accountable. When you look at, for example, the different protest waves in the past few years, and you look at those who are in charge of ordering the atrocities that have been done, you'll see many similar names across the nation and across the institutions. Those individuals should fear continuing doing what they are doing to the people, because as long as they see no consequences, and consequence, again, in my view, is a path of justice. The country, the Iranian regime has shown that it's not structurally designed, and it will not hold itself accountable. Therefore, we will need to resort to multilateral justice mechanisms that exist outside the country. And in my view, that's the only way forward, in addition to all the other tools that you mentioned. But at the end of the day, it's that we need to advocate for the international community to end the culture of impunity in the Islamic Republic of Iran, or else we will be talking about these grave numbers of executions, arrests, tortures, with negotiations, without negotiations. The saga will continue.
Thank you so much, Azadeh. Thank you so much, Behrooz Bayat, Mahdi Ghodsi, Azadeh Pourzand, for all your fantastic analyses. And I think the discussion showed that there's a high level of complexity to all those international but also domestic issues that we are facing, and that even in the case of diplomacy succeeding, we cannot really expect change in a fundamental nature, be it on the economic or political development fronts. So we may only see some gradual changes. Also, we should not forget that the current diplomatic arrangement or the current discussions in diplomacy are geared perhaps toward only an interim deal. So a lot of things can happen. There's also the factor of Israel, and Israeli also aims to dismantle not only Iran's nuclear program but also its ballistic program. So there's a lot of moving dynamics here. But thank you, and I think it was quite an insightful discussion that enabled us to look, or to widen our perspective, to look at various dimensions that are still ongoing and flowing. So thank you for all those who joined us on Zoom and for your very pertinent questions. You can check out the video, and we're going to upload it on our YouTube channel. Also, please do follow our work, which is at cmeg.org, CMEG.org. And we're also on Instagram, on Facebook, on X. And we also have a German language weekly Iran bulletin, an analytical briefing, which is called Focus Iran, focus-iran.com in German language. Please do support our work. CMEG is an entirely voluntary-based organization, so all of our team members are working with a lot of passion and energy only. So this is what is fueling them. So please do support our work. And hopefully you can join us in the next webinar talking about issues of importance for the Middle East, but also beyond. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time.